The termination letter was already signed when Garrett Summers walked out of Harlow Regional Medical Center for the last time, carrying nothing but a worn canvas tote bag and a crayon drawing his 9-year-old son had tucked into his coat pocket that morning. A lopsided house with 2 stick figures standing in front of it, labeled Dad and Finn in purple crayon. Behind him, the hospital corridors buzzed with whispers. Colleagues said he had finally snapped. Department heads shook their heads and said, "Was a shame, really such a waste of talent." A few people who had worked beside him for years didn't say anything at all, which somehow felt worse. None of them knew why he actually left. None of them had been standing in the school hallway 2 weeks earlier, when the principal pulled him aside and told him, gently, but clearly, that Finn had stopped eating lunch, that he sat alone every day at the end of the cafeteria table and didn't talk to other kids anymore, that his teacher had found him crying in the bathroom, and when she asked what was wrong, he said he didn't think his dad was coming back someday. Garrett had stood in that hallway, holding his hospital badge, and felt something inside him go very, very quiet. He had been a respiratory therapist at Harlow Regional for 11 years. Not a doctor, not a surgeon, the kind of person who kept patients breathing when everything else was failing, who worked overnight shifts in the ICU while families sat in waiting rooms not knowing his name. He was good at it, extraordinarily good, the kind of quiet, indispensable good that institutions take for granted, because it never makes noise. His wife Laurel had died 22 months earlier. A brain aneurysm, completely without warning. She was 37 years old and had been making coffee when it happened. Finn was 7. What followed those 22 months was a particular kind of survival that doesn't look like survival from the outside. Garrett woke at 5, packed lunches that Finn sometimes ate and sometimes didn't, drove 40 minutes to school, worked 10-hour shifts that routinely stretched to 12, rushed back to pick Finn up from aftercare with minutes to spare, reheated dinners neither of them finished, and sat on the edge of Finn's bed each night until the boy fell asleep, because Finn refused to sleep alone since the day his mother didn't come home. Garrett never complained. He wasn't built that way. He filed the requests for schedule accommodations, quietly and professionally. He was told, politely and professionally, that staffing constraints made flexibility impossible. He was told that bedside care required physical presence, and that his personal situation, while understandably difficult, could not be factored into departmental scheduling. He kept showing up. He kept working. He kept being good at the invisible thing he did. Then came the morning Finn's teacher called during a code situation, and Garrett couldn't pick up. Then the afternoon Finn was sent to the nurse's office with a stomachache and sat there for 3 hours because his emergency contact, Garrett's sister, Linda, who lived 40 minutes away, didn't see the message until her own shift ended. Then the night Garrett arrived at aftercare to find Finn sitting outside in November air because the center had closed and the staff had waited as long as they could. Finn didn't cry that night. He just looked at his father with eyes too steady for a 9-year-old and said, "I knew you'd come." Garrett sat in the car for a long time before starting the engine. He gave his notice the following Monday. No scene, no ultimatum. He walked into his supervisor's office, handed over the letter, and said he was grateful for his time there. His supervisor looked genuinely surprised for about 4 seconds, then asked whether his caseload had been documented for transition. It had been. Of course it had. Garrett was that kind of person. He spent the first week at home in a kind of stunned quiet, waiting for the panic to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead was Finn, appearing in the kitchen doorway at 7:30 in the morning in his pajamas, looking at his father with visible confusion. "You're still here," Finn said. "I'm still here," Garrett said. They ate breakfast together for the first time, in longer than either of them could remember. Finn talked about a book he was reading. Garrett listened to every word. The hospital meanwhile had a problem. Harlow Regional had recently partnered with a regional health network to implement a new ventilator management protocol across 3 facilities. The protocol was complex, the rollout was compressed, and the person who had been the quiet architect of the respiratory department's workflow, the one who actually understood how the equipment behaved under pressure, who had written the internal training guide everyone used, who knew where every procedural gap was, had just walked out the door. 2 weeks after Garrett left, an incident during a training simulation, exposed a critical error in the transition documentation. Patient safety wasn't at immediate risk, but it could be. The network was paying attention. The accreditation timeline was firm. The hospital's chief medical officer was a woman named Dr. Renata Aldis. She was 44, formidably competent, and had built her career on operational precision. She had been recruited from a top-tier hospital system in Boston 3 years earlier to modernize Harlow Regional. And she had done exactly that. Cutting inefficiencies, raising metrics, tightening every system that could be measured. She was respected by the board and slightly feared by everyone else. She did not, as a rule, personally involve herself in staffing complications below the department director level. But when the protocol error surfaced and 3 senior respiratory staff couldn't resolve it independently, her director of clinical operations finally put a name in front of her. Garrett Summers. Renata read his file in under 10 minutes, 11 years, no disciplinary notes, consistently above benchmark on every measurable metric, had submitted 3 formal requests for schedule modification over the course of 2s, all denied. Resigned without incident or legal action. She sat with the file for a moment. Then she asked where he lived. She drove herself. That surprised her assistant, who had assumed she would send a department liaison. Renata had no particular reason for going, personally, except that she found she wanted to, and she wasn't someone who second-guessed her instincts. The address took her to a neighborhood on the eastern edge of town that she had never had reason to visit. Small houses set close together, tall maples that were beautiful in the fall, and probably a problem in the winter, yards that were tidy but modest. It was nothing like the neighborhoods she moved through in her ordinary life, and she was aware, pulling up to the curb, that this gap had never registered with her before. She knocked. A 9-year-old boy answered the door before she finished knocking, looked at her with frank curiosity, and yelled over his shoulder, "Dad, there's a lady in a coat." Garrett appeared a moment later. He was wearing a flannel shirt, holding a dish towel, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not hostile, not particularly surprised. "Just, present, Dr. Aldis," he said. "I should have called," she said. "You're here now," he said, and held the door open. The house was small, and cluttered in the specific way that a single parent's house gets cluttered. School papers on the kitchen table, a pair of sneakers near the door with the laces still tied, a mug on the counter with a drawing of a dog on it that had clearly been made by a child. A half-assembled model airplane sat on the coffee table. Finn had returned to it and was pressing pieces together with focused concentration. Renata stood just inside the door and felt something she didn't have a ready name for. She had been in many homes. She had never felt quite like this in any of them. "I'll get you some coffee," Garrett said. "You don't have to, it's already made." She sat at the kitchen table. He poured 2 cups. Finn wandered in, studied her with the unself-conscious assessment of a child and announced that she had a nice coat. "Thank you," Renata said. "Finn," Garrett said, in the mild voice of a parent who has learned not to overcorrect. "What?" "She does." Finn took a handful of crackers from the cabinet and went back to his airplane. Garrett sat down across from her. He knew why she was there. She could tell he knew, and was waiting to see how she would say it. She said it directly. The protocol documentation, the error, the timeline, the scope. She told him the department was struggling, and that his institutional knowledge was irreplaceable in the short term. She offered a consulting arrangement. Good rate, flexible hours, temporary. Garrett listened to all of it, with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Then he said no. Not unkindly. He said it the way someone says something they've already thought through carefully. He told her that he understood the situation, and he was sorry it was difficult, and he genuinely wished his former colleagues well. But he had left for a reason. He was Finn's only parent. For 2 years, he had structured every choice around a job that would not structure anything around him. He wasn't angry about it, but he wasn't going back. Not even temporarily, because he had learned enough about institutional temporary to know what it cost. Renata didn't argue. She was a person who argued effectively and often, and she found she had nothing to say. She looked across the kitchen at Finn, who had abandoned the airplane, and was now drawing something with the focused silence of a child in the middle of an idea. "How long has it been," she said quietly, "since his mom passed?" 22 months, Garrett said. The kitchen was quiet. He stopped eating lunch at school, Garrett said. For about a month, his teacher told me. He said he thought I wasn't coming back someday. He said it without any drama. Just a fact, just the fact that had changed everything. I can fix a ventilator circuit in the dark. I can't fix that from a 12-hour shift. Renata drove back to the hospital. She sat in the parking garage for longer than she usually allowed herself to sit anywhere. The thing she kept returning to was not the protocol problem, which was solvable. It was the look on Finn's face when he came into the kitchen, open, comfortable, unconcerned. The look of a child who expected his father to be there. She had built her career around metrics that measured outcomes, and she understood, in the parking garage, that she had spent 11 years, not measuring the outcomes of the people who generated them. She went back into the building and pulled every staffing accommodation request that had been denied in the past 3 years. There were 47 of them. Over the following days, Renata found herself thinking about Garrett Summers more than the situation professionally warranted. She told herself it was because the protocol issue remained unresolved. This was true, and also not entirely the point. She drove past the repair shop, where Finn had mentioned, in passing, that his dad sometimes picked up extra work. She was not the kind of person who drove past repair shops. She told herself she needed to pass through that part of town anyway. She saw Garrett through the window. He was working on something mechanical, and 2 other people in the shop were watching him work with the particular attention people give to someone who is faster and better than everyone else in the room. A woman came in with a question and he answered it without looking up, and she laughed at something he said. He smiled. It was the first time Renata had seen him smile. She drove away before he saw her. She went back to the hospital and worked until 9 o'clock, and went home to an apartment that was very clean and very quiet, and had no drawings taped to the refrigerator. She stood in her kitchen and tried to remember the last time she had laughed about something smalls. She couldn't. The protocol situation came to a head 3 weeks after her visit to Garrett's house. The network compliance team set a hard deadline. The board was briefed. Renata's director of clinical operations came to her office and laid out the options, none of which were good. Renata thought about all of them for approximately 90 seconds. Then she did something she had never done in her professional life. She called a department heads meeting and told them directly that the hospital had failed the people who kept it running. She didn't dress it up. She said they had built a system that extracted maximum output from the people who could least afford to push back, and then acted surprised when those people left. She said the protocol failure was not a staffing problem. It was a values problem, and she was going to fix it. The room was very quiet. Then she called Garrett. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She could hear Finn in the background, something about dinner. She told him she wasn't calling about the protocol. She said she had been going through the accommodation requests, all 47 of them. And she needed him to know that what had happened to him was wrong. The denials were wrong. The scheduling was wrong. The way his situation had been handled was wrong. She said it plainly, without qualification, because that was the only way she knew how to say things that mattered. There was a pause. "Okay," he said, "thank you for saying that. I'm also calling," she said, "because I want to offer you your position back, not as a consulting arrangement, your actual position, with modifications that should have existed from the start. Flexible scheduling with Finn's school calendar built in. A remote protocol contribution option for weeks, when coverage is an issue. Full benefits, seniority retained, and a seat on the implementation team for the new network rollout, not as a technician, as a lead." Another pause. "That's a different offer," he said. "It should have been the offer 11 years ago," she said. He didn't answer immediately. She listened to the background sounds of his house, the small, specific sounds of a life happening in real time. A chair scraping, something being put down on a counter. Finn's voice asking a question she couldn't make out. "I need to think about it," he said. "I know," she said. "Take the time." She almost said goodbye and hung up. Instead she said, "For what it's worth, Finn seems like a good kid, a beat." "He really is," Garrett said. She went to his house one more time. It was a Sunday evening, and she hadn't called ahead, because she wasn't sure she would go until she was already in the car. She had a folder with her, the formal offer, printed, with everything they had discussed, written into the terms. But the folder felt like a pretext. She was aware of that, He opened the door and didn't look surprised. Finn appeared immediately behind him and said, "You came back." "I came back," she said. He let her in. They sat at the kitchen table again. The model airplane was finished and sitting on the windowsill. Finn showed her this unprompted, carrying it over with the careful pride of someone who had made something worth showing. She looked at it properly, asking which part was hardest to assemble, and Finn explained at length. Garrett made coffee again. Outside, it was raining steadily against the kitchen windows. When Finn eventually drifted toward the living room with a book, the kitchen went quiet. Garrett looked at the folder. "You didn't have to come in person," he said. "I know," she said. He opened the folder. "Read through it." She watched him read. He was thorough, unhurried, taking in each line. The kind of person who read the whole thing before responding, which, she thought, explained a great deal about why he had lasted 11 years before finally leaving. He closed it, set it on the table between them. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. Why did you come to the house the first time, instead of sending someone?" She had thought about this question. She gave him the honest answer. "Because I read your file," she said, "and I realized I should have read it years ago, and I wanted to be the one to sit across from you when I said that." The rain picked up. The kitchen light was warm. Finn laughed at something in the other room, a private laugh, the laugh of a child alone with a book who finds something funny and doesn't need anyone to share it with. It was such a complete sound. Renata hadn't heard anything like it in a long time. "I'll come back," Garrett said. "Not because the hospital needs me to, because the work matters, and because you're actually trying to change something." He looked at her steadily. "If that changes, I'll leave again." "That's fair," she said, "and Finn comes first, every time, no exceptions, no apologies." "That's in the offer," she said. "But yes, every time." He nodded once, then something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small shift, like a door that had been almost closed moving slightly open. "Thank you for coming back," he said, and she understood, in the way you understand something after the fact that you missed while it was happening, that he was not only talking about tonight. Garrett returned to Harlow Regional the following Monday. He walked in through the same entrance he had used for 11 years, and people stopped to greet him. Not the performative welcome back, of institutional gesture, but the genuine, slightly awkward warmth of people who had felt his absence, and didn't quite know how to say so. He fixed the protocol documentation in 4 days. What had paralyzed the department for weeks was, in his hands, a series of solvable problems, approached in the right order. He didn't announce this or accept particular credit for it. He just handed his team lead a completed document at the end of the 4th day, and asked if there was anything that needed revision. There wasn't. Under the new terms, he left every day at 3:15. He was at school pickup every afternoon for the first time in 2 years. Finn started sitting with other kids at lunch again, slowly, then less slowly. He started talking more at dinner. He finished the second model airplane and immediately began lobbying for a third. The accommodation framework Renata built from the 47 denied requests became a formal hospital policy. Parents weren't the only ones who used it. Caregivers, people managing chronic conditions, employees with long commutes, from areas where housing was still affordable. The policy reached people in ways Renata hadn't anticipated and felt, in retrospect, should have been obvious. She and Garrett met regularly for protocol review, which was professional and necessary, and occasionally for coffee, which was neither. They were both cautious people. They both carried damage they had learned to manage quietly. Trust, for both of them, was a thing that had to be earned in small increments over real time, and neither of them tried to rush it. Finn had no such caution. He had decided early that Renata was trustworthy, on the basis of criteria he kept largely to himself. He showed her things, drawings, facts he had learned, opinions about books and weather, and the relative difficulty of model airplane parts. He did this with the matter-of-fact generosity of a child, who gives his trust completely or not at all. She didn't take it lightly. She had received a lot in her life: recognition, authority, the specific validation of professional achievement, and she had learned that most of it felt like less than it looked. This felt like more. One evening, after a thunderstorm had turned into a long, slow rain that made going home feel less urgent than it might have, she was helping Finn work through a reading assignment at the kitchen table, while Garrett cleaned up after dinner. The assignment was about a boy who moves to a new place, and doesn't know anyone. Finn read it aloud with the careful diction of someone who takes reading seriously. When he finished, he looked at her. "Do you think he finds a friend?" Finn asked. The end of the passage left it unresolved. "I think he does," she said. "What do you think?" Finn considered it with the gravity he brought to most things. "I think so too," he said. "He keeps trying." He looked at the page. "That's the important part, when you keep trying even when it's hard." She looked up. Garrett had turned from the sink and was watching them both with the quiet expression of a person who is memorizing something. She looked back at Finn. "That's right," she said. "That's exactly the important part." There was no dramatic moment when things changed between Garrett and Renata. No single evening when everything shifted. It happened the way real things happen. Gradually, then undeniably, in the ordinary accumulation of shared hours and small trust, and the specific warmth that develops between people who have each learned, the hard way, to recognize what matters. Garrett learned that Renata laughed at things she didn't expect to find funny, and that she laughed without reservation when she did. He learned that she arrived early to everything, and kept a worn paperback in her bag for waiting rooms, and was, beneath the professional certainty, genuinely uncertain about a number of things she had never given herself permission to acknowledge. She learned that he was funny in a way that didn't announce itself, and that he had read more than she would have guessed, and that the steadiness she had initially read as reserve was not actually distance. It was the particular groundedness of someone who had been through something enormous, and come out the other side knowing what he was made of. She had spent 20 years becoming someone formidable, and she had succeeded. She had not understood until recently what she had not become in the same period. She was learning. Months later, during a quiet dinner at a restaurant that was neither too formal nor too casual, a place Finn had selected from a list of options, having been included in the decision on the grounds that this seemed fair, Renata watched Garrett and Finn argue amiably about whether the soup was better than the soup they made at home, and felt something she had largely believed was not available to her anymore. She felt like someone who had found her way into a warmth she hadn't known she was locked out of. On the drive home, Finn fell asleep in the back seat. Garrett drove. The city lights moved across the windows in slow patterns. "Can I tell you something?" Renata said. "Yes," he said. "I didn't think." She stopped. Started again. "I spent a long time building something very airtight, and I thought that was the goal. I thought if nothing could get in, nothing could hurt you." She looked at the lights outside. "I didn't think about what also couldn't get in." Garrett didn't say anything right away. He drove another block. "I know," he said quietly. "I lived in that for a while too, after Laurel. Just getting through. Closed down enough to function. What changed it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Finn asked me if work was more important than he was," he said, "and I didn't have a good answer. So I changed the situation until I did." She thought about 47 accommodation requests, about 11 years of someone being quietly indispensable while his life asked for something small that no one gave him. "I'm sorry that took so long to fix," she said. "You fixed it," he said. "That counts." The car was warm, and Finn was sleeping, and the city was doing what cities do at night, moving, glittering, full of lives happening simultaneously in ways that never quite intersect. Renata thought about her apartment, clean and quiet, and found she was in no particular hurry to get back to it. She was for the first time in longer than she could easily calculate, exactly where she wanted to be. Not every story about second chances looks like a miracle. Most of them look like this, like a folder on a kitchen table, and rain on a window, and a child explaining the hard parts of a model airplane to someone who listened like it mattered. Like a person deciding finally that the walls they built were not actually keeping them safe. Like two people, both carrying more than anyone could see, finding that they didn't have to keep carrying it alone. The strongest people are not the ones who never need anything. They are the ones who finally, when someone worthy of their trust is standing at the door, decide to open it.